You don't think much of the quiet guy in the corner seat at the pub. He keeps to himself, drinks slowly, smiles politely when spoken to, then disappears into the night. No one ever suspected he was storing human remains under his floorboards, or boiling skulls in his kitchen, or chatting with corpses. Dressedan seated in his armchair long after they were dead. No one ever guessed. And that was the terrifying part, because Nielson wasn't a monster you'd see. He was the kind you never noticed until it was far too late. Dennis Nielson was born on November 23 RD 1945 in the small fishing town of Fraserburgh, Scotland. His childhood wasn't horrific, but it was profoundly isolating. His father, a Norwegian, was rarely around and eventually abandoned the family. When Dennis was still a boy, his mother remarried, and with a new stepfather and several siblings, Dennis often felt like an outsider in his own home. But there was one person he adored, his grandfather, a quiet, kind fisherman who treated Dennis with warmth no one else seemed to offer. He called him the only man who ever loved me. When Dennis was 6, his grandfather died at sea. No one told him at first. They waited until Thibody was brought back. Then they brought Dennis to view the corpse before their funeral, still in his Sunday clothes, lying cold and grey in a coffin. Something inside Dennis snapped. It wasn't grief in the normal sense. It was confusion, a deep fascination with the finality of death and the stillness of a body. The boy who once ran round the beaches now sat in silence, his thoughts spiraling inwards. Through adolescence, he became increasingly withdrawn. He realized he was gay, a reality he kept hidden, fearing rejection. His isolation grew. He would watch boys from a distance, never speaking, just longing. Later, in his teens, he joined the British Army. He trained as a chef, serving in Germany and the Middle East. The military brought order to his life, but not connection. He continued to fantasize about being with men, yes, but more disturbingly about being in total control, about someone lying next to him, completely still, completely his. His relationships never lasted. The first victim was 14-year-old Steve. They met at a pub on December 30, 1978. Stephen was too young to bother, but no one noticed. Nielson invited him home for drinks and a placebo crash. In the morning, when Stephen tried to leave, Nielson panicked. He didn't want him to go, so he strangled him with a necktie, then drowned him in a bucket of water to make sure he was dead. He washed the body, dressed it, and laid it in bed with him, talking to it, sleeping beside it, treating it like his partner for 7 months. He kept the corpse hidden in his flat, sometimes pulling it out to sit in a chair while he watched TV. Eventually, the decomposition became too much. Hugh burned the body in a bonfire in Vegaden, burying the ashes under paving stones. That was the start of something Nielson would later describe as a sad obsession. His second victim, Kenneth O'Kendon, was a 23-year-old Canadian tourist. They met in December 1979. Nielson showed him around London, bought him drinks, took photos. Kenneth didn't realize it was a date. Back at Nielson's flat, they listened to music. As Kenneth wore Nielson's headphones, looking down at the record player, Nielson snuck up behind him and strangled him with a headphone cord. Again, he washed Thibody, dressed it, and laid it on Thebed. The next day, Nielson sat next to the corpse and ate breakfast. Over the next 3 years, the pattern repeated as it pubs, bus stations, shelters, seeking out young, vulnerable men, often homeless or drifting. They trusted him because he was soft-spoken, polite and offered food, warmth. A couch toasted on. One victim, John Howlett, resisted and nearly escaped. When Howlett passed out, Nielson submerged him in a bathtub until stopped struggling. He later told Paulus that the struggle both excited and frightened him. Once dead, Howlett's body joined the same macabre ritual of bathing, redressing, and keeping. Eventually, the smell of decomposition was a problem. Neighbors complained, but Nielson always had an excuse: blocker drains, cooking smells, damp carpets. When that failed, he moved to a new flated 23 Cranley Gardens in Muswell Hill. This time, it was an upper floor unit with no garden. He couldn't burn Thebides anymore. Still, the killing continued. He murdered 3 more men there, storing their bodies in wardrobes, under floorboards, even boiling parts in cooking pots in an attempt to dispose of them. But the plumbing wasn't designed to handle flesh. In February 1983, Nielson tried flushing body parts down the toilet. Soon, the pipes clogged. A plumber was called. What he found in the drains wasn't just fetid, was human remains. Chunks of flesh, tiny bones, skin. The police were called. That night, officers knocked on Nielson's door. He answered calmly and even invited them in. They noticed the smell first. Then they found plastic bags in the closet. When asked what was inside, Nielson answered quietly, "It's a body." Then, after a pause, "Actually, there are 2. He didn't resist arrest. In fact, he seemed relieved. At the police station, Dennis Nielson began to talk freely, almost eagerly. He confessed to killing 15 men, though couldn't remember all their names. Some, he said, were never reported missing. He described each murder in chilling detail, how he lured them in, how he killed them, and what he did with bodies afterward. He seemed more interested in sharing his memories than expressing regret. When asked why he killed, his answer was simple and haunting. "I wanted company. The dead," he said, "never left. They couldn't reject him, hurt him, or walk away. He treated them like companions, sometimes even speaking to them long after they were gone." The trial began in October 1983. The evidence was overwhelming: body parts, photographs, forensic proof. The jury heard tape recordings of Nielson's confessions, including his calm descriptions of death and decay. His defense tried to argue diminished responsibility, claiming mental illness, but the court found him sane and fully aware of his actions. On November 4, 1983, Dennis Nielson was convicted of 6 counts of murder and 2 counts of attempted murder. He was sentenced to life imprisonment, with a recommendation that he never be released. Nielson accepted the verdict without emotion. He would spend the rest of his life behind bars, writing thousands of pages of memoirs, reflecting on his crimes, and often painting grotesque images that echoed his past in prison. He was described as polite, intelligent, and helpful, just as he had been outside. But other inmates feared him. Some said they saw a darkness in his eyes, something cold and unreachable. He remained largely unrepentant, claiming that he hadn't acted out of hatred or rage, but loneliness, justification that only deepened the horror of what he'd done. Dennis Nielson died in prison on May 12, 2018, at the age of 72, after suffering a ruptured abdominal aorta. Even in death, his legacy remained one of terror notebooks. He was the loudest or the bloodiest, but because he was the quietest, he didn't scream, he didn't chase. He invited people in, made them comfortable, then quietly stole their lives, and no one suspected a thing.